Welcome to episode 8 of SYNAPTIC, our podcast that investigates the people, the research, and the challenges of the neuroscience field. And welcome to The Transmitter. That's our new name. We have relaunched Spectrum as a media outlet focused on the entirety of neuroscience. And now I work for The Transmitter. Okay, before we get to today's episode, a little more news. I haven't had a chance to relay this yet, but SYNAPTIC won a Signal Award. That's the annual Global Podcast Award sponsored by HBO Max and Podglomerate and Pod People and a few others. We entered episode 3 of SYNAPTIC with Ashura Buckley in the Science and Education category. And the judges picked it for the gold. I was definitely surprised by this. We're a new show, and that was just our 3rd episode, and we're not Gimlet or Serial or Wondery or any of those big names. But we won the gold. So anytime a new interview show wins gold for a single episode, you have to just point to the guest. And Shu Buckley gave an open, warm interview, and she said smart, thoughtful things. And that, apparently, is how you win a Signal Award. So if you haven't listened to the Ashura Buckley interview yet, go to the archives. She is episode 3. So there you go. You're now listening to an award-winning podcast. Okay, for today's show, let's start in Albuquerque, New Mexico, around the mid-1980s. And let's specifically go to the Albuquerque Christian Children's Home, a nonprofit ministry meant to help children in need, to provide them shelter, food, and guidance, including spiritual guidance. It's on the west side of Albuquerque and sits on 6 acres of property. The children there live in cottages, and each cottage has a set of house parents that oversees it. The ACCH, as it's called, housed its first child in 1970, and over the last 50-plus years, it has provided care to around 600 kids. Now, it's called a home, or a group home, but it could also be called an orphanage. And David Sussillo spent formative years there. That's today's guest, David Sussillo. And it was in ACCH that David realized he needed to find something that could lift him out of his situation. And he began to think, began to consider his talents, specifically looking for something he could use. And he realized that what he had was his intelligence. That was his gift. And that would be the thing he'd use to bootstrap himself, as he says, to a different place. We talked about that in this podcast. We also talked about his time in the Milton Hershey School, a boarding school for kids who have demonstrated resilience, as its website states, though it might also be described as a place that takes in children in need. We talked about writing the Sussillo and Abbott paper as a PhD student and how that changed David's trajectory. And we talked about neural networks and doing neuroscience research in industry versus academia, and how those differ. All that coming up in the next hour and a quarter. I recorded David at his home in California on September 27th, 2023. It was a warm day, sunny, in the low 70s. He lives on a quiet street about 10 minutes from Stanford, so quiet that mobile phone service drops away as you wind toward his address. His house is earthy, I'd say. It's warm in color with wood tones inside. His house has a fence around it and a nice garden. There were some birds in the trees of his garden, which you can actually hear in the recording. And also for a bit, someone doing some landscaping until we got up and shut the windows. So let's pick it up here, where David is telling me how he made his way to California. Here is your Synaptic episode with David Sussillo, starting right now.
For, 2011, so 12 years.
Yeah.
I finished my PhD with Larry Abbott.
Yeah.
And was sort of wondering what to do. And so it seemed reasonable with Krishna Shenoy and Mark Churchland that some of the things that Larry and I were thinking about would be reasonable to apply to some of the monkey movement data sets that they were generating. And so I actually came out here for a 2-week trial, because I'm a computational guy, right? Everyone in those labs are really experimentalists. I don't mean to pigeonhole people, so they just wanted to see if it would work, and within a week or two we're like, hey, we can really apply these things. And so based on that initial experience, my wife and I moved out here, and I joined Krishna's lab in 2010, almost exactly 13 years ago.
Oh, okay. Because I thought you had come out for Google. All right. So let's go back to Albuquerque.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's where you're born, New Mexico.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
So I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. As a sort of well known at this point, my parents were both drug addicts.
When you were born?
As far as I know. I knew my parents for a few years. I knew them as a young child. I lived with them. That became untenable. And so eventually I and my sister, we moved to an orphanage, a group home called the Albuquerque Christian Children's Home.
And so are you the second born?
I am, yes.
So you had an older sister?
I did,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so when you say it became untenable.
Let's see, my father left and my mother became mentally ill, and so she went to a hospital.
And how old are you?
That would have been 7 or 8.
Oh, so pretty young.
Oh,
really
yeah,
young.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so you're in a family home, maybe not that stable, but a family home till you're about 7 or 8.
That's right. Yeah.
And then, whose decision was it for the orphanage?
That's a great question. I think it ultimately fell to my grandparents. There was a question of whether or not they might take us in or we might be adopted, but neither of those happened. And so we went to this place, this orphanage. Yeah.
This is your mother's parents?
Yeah, my mother's parents, that's right.
Were they in Albuquerque?
They were, yes. I knew them well, actually. We would go over after, or to go to church on Sunday and then go out to Fur's cafeteria or some place for food. And, yeah.
So you had a family environment around you.
I did have a family environment around me until about 6 or 7.
Yeah,
that's right.
These early years, 7 or 8, were you aware that your parents were troubled, that your mother was a heroin addict, your father was a heroin addict?
I had no idea.
No idea.
Yeah, no. I think kids are really oblivious to this stuff. I mean, I was. Obviously looking back, I can think about behaviors that didn't quite add up. But I mean, if you've only known one thing your whole life and you're a kid, it's not very confusing. It's like, hey, I'm just doing my thing here.
Yeah, there's no comparator really.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's what I was
Okay. I'd heard that you've gone into a home. So at 7 or 8, you go in. Did your sister go in with you?
Yes, she did.
So
right.
Were you able to keep that tie?
Well, a little bit. She and I never had really anything in common. So at the group home, there were 3 different cottages, right? So cottage 1, 2, and 3. And oftentimes we weren't even in the same house. I don't know exactly why that decision was made, but it was probably because interactions with the house parents are like really fundamental. If you don't get along with them, life is hell. And if you get along with them, life is decent. So that could have been some of the reasoning there. But honestly, my sister and I grew apart in that orphanage.
Oh, because I would have thought that you would have, bonded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it didn't work out that way.
Okay. So what was, if you don't mind me asking,
sure.
life like in this home?
What is it like? Oof.
Well, here, maybe I'll start with the easier question.
Yeah.
How large?
Sure. I see. Yeah, I can give some descriptions. So it was 3 cottages, and cottage is really sort of misleading because these were 6,000 square foot, ranch style brick homes.
Yeah.
Each could hold 20 people, including a set of house parents and their couple of kids. So on any given time, I mean, back in the 80s, there was a lot of people there, a lot of kids rather. So we probably had anywhere from 30 to 50 kids on any given day. And a lot of what goes on there is it's meant to be transient. I mean, nowadays people understand that orphanages are a pretty terrible idea, and the fostering as a way of handling some of these societal problems is much more preferred than just putting kids in an orphanage.
Yep.
So it was meant to be transitory, but for my sister and I, it was not. We were there for 5 years. And so you got to know some kids who were, we informally call ourselves lifers, who had been around a long time. And, but a lot of kids, I look at some of the pictures that I have now and I don't even recognize them, right? They're just sort of part of the in and out and the tapestry and a sense of really constant flux and constant change.
They're coming in and out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Versus, I know you weren't there for your life, but a lifer, 5 years would be a lifer.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I ultimately ended up at a Milton Hershey school, which is a very large, glorified, wealthy orphanage.
Yeah. This idea, so some kids were leaving. Mm-hmm. Would they were they returning to their parents or were they adopted out by new parents?
I have no idea. I think adoption is pretty rare once you get to be 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. There's clear behavioral problems that accrue from the kind of life that I had as a kid. And my understanding is that's pretty clear to adults. And a lot of adults really want that malleable, cherubic young baby. Yeah, exactly. So I would imagine that they found ways to either family members or back to their parents, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. But so you're in there for a good amount of time. So you said you were about 7 or 8 when you went in.
Yeah.
So this takes you up into your teenage years.
In my teenagers, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so what happened is my mother passed away. And so it's a funny thing because, a mother is obviously very important and special to the relationship with a child. But, my mother was very sick. She was in and out of a psych ward for 5 years and contending with issues related to addiction. So when she passed away, it actually, in some sense, gave an opportunity for my extended family to get involved. Right, because my mother is no longer there anymore.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. So they feel like they can actually get involved.
So they may have wanted to get involved before, but there actually was a parent around, so they're like, that's not my place.
Exactly. Almost. Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Exactly. So what happened is I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Maryland.
In Maryland. Okay, at like 13 or something.
Let's see. Yes, exactly. At 13.
All right. So you, from these early years, before you were, would you call it
ACCH, Albuquerque Christian Children's Home.
Was your relationship with your mother strong? I mean, was the loss of her?
I think it was. That's a complicated question because if I look back at sort of the real trauma of my life, it was going to the orphanage in the first place, right? So I think there might have been that sense of loss sort of in slow motion over the 5 years that I was there. I mean, also, the emotional aspect of living in a group home is such that you become very desensitized, right? So after living there for 5 years, I mean, I don't know if I would have even said I loved my mother. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I loved my mother.
Yeah.
But it's a very tough place to live. I mean, just state the obvious. A lot of kids don't really survive that experience, right? They don't really make it in life. So yeah, it was a loss when she died, for sure. In the way that I experienced it was not so much in an emotional feeling. It was through behavior. My behavior became very, very poor, especially in school and especially around teachers who were women.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I was getting kicked out of class essentially constantly, and the threat of expulsion was the thing that ultimately corrected my behavior.
So I should ask: is the schooling happening in the orphanage?
No, actually,
we
went to public schools.
Or you would go back and come back at night.
Yeah, so we went to public schools. I was in a middle school called John Adams or something. Yeah.
Okay. So this idea that you said it was like a slow loss of your mother. Mm-hmm. For 5 years, she was not around.
Yeah.
Did you see her at all in that period?
She would come. Yeah. So initially, she would try to. My mother actually cared. You know, she really did care. She would try to take us out and take us back into her life. But she couldn't do it. And the neighborhood we were living in it's actually known as the war zone. That was not a great place for kids. So between those two things, it was just hugely unstable. And so I think everyone realized, including me, was like, oh, I'm probably just better off here.
In the home.
Yeah, exactly.
So she'd take you out for a week or something.
Here and there. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So this is sort of like a slow loss of the mother figure, and then she dies. So it's not like an severing.
It was totally unexpected, by the way.
It was?
Yeah. She died of a medication mix-up, I believe, or something. I mean, the right way to say it is she died from the complications of
her life,
of addicted life, and all the things that she was going through. Right?
Yeah.
And there was a physical reason, but anyways, it was. Let's say she was a ball of yarn that was hard to disentangle, right?
Yeah. So when you begin to act out, do you think that's because suddenly there was no hope? She was not coming to try again to get you out of there. Then it was like, well, this is it. I'm on my own.
Maybe it's hard to sort of put a cause behind some of it. I mean, the thing to understand about, like, you're a kid, right? So your mind is developing as all of these things are happening around you that you have no agency about, right? Like, I have no agency of where I'm living. I have no agency about my house parents. House parents can be good house parents. They can be less good. I have no agency about what's going on with my core family. I haven't seen my father in so long. So because of that, I would say that it's very hard to say what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
I was just simply adapting, or maybe another word would be surviving.
Yeah.
So that's honestly how I would think about it.
Okay, so that around 13, she dies. you begin to act out. They do expel you from school?
They do not. No. So the threat of being at the ACCH all day long, alone in my room with detentions, was enough to keep me at least on a level of behavior that was not expulsion.
So was the house that terrible? I mean, for some reason I'm thinking, well, it's not like 200 kids.
Yeah.
Your face is telling me it was terrible.
It's hard to explain. It's like living with a low-grade fever.
Uh-huh.
You know, I keep saying it's hard to explain, because imagine if you didn't have parents. Imagine if you didn't feel love, right? Everything, and imagine all the kids around you also don't have those experiences. Then everything is one step away from Lord of the Flies, and Piggy gets a rock in the head, right? Just, it was an unsafe place. It was an emotionally unsafe place. And if your house parents weren't great, then all of a sudden, these house parents are really doing really impossible work, and they want to be there. For them, it's a mission. The Albuquerque Christian Children's Home, these are practicing Christians, right? Yeah. So, but from this perspective of a child, the view is very much, this is an authority figure, and I don't want to be under the thumb, and all of that kind of thinking. Right.
So it's not as if they're sort of surrounding you with love, because they're overworked, all those things.
It's all about the ratio. The answer is yes to your question. You do not feel surrounded in love.
Yeah.
Because if you have 16 kids to 2 house parents, I'm sorry, the math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really what's going on.
And then you said this kind of sort of like a low-grade fever. Like I'm sure that you weren't. Well, I'm not sure of this, but there was always a threat.
It felt that way.
I mean, even if it isn't even happening every day, there's always a threat. Some other kid may come after you.
Something like that.
Yeah, you just feel unsettled. You don't feel secure.
Yeah, I would say that. I want to be somewhat nuanced here. It wasn't like I was, in fear for my life every day at the ACCH. That's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
But you develop an emotional stance where you're the only one that's taking care of you, and you're not thinking that, right? Because you're a kid.
Yeah.
That's your stance.
Yeah.
And we couldn't leave the group home because of insurance reasons. So we're on this little plot, 5 acres of dirt in the desert, right? So there's nothing to do most of the time. It's just not a great place. It's not stimulating. It's not intellectually stimulating. It's not emotionally stimulating. And so, that's why I didn't want to spend my days expelled in my room.
Right. So you're sort of, I'm going to say, like now walking the straight and narrow at school, maybe for the first time. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, something like that.
Ish.
And you're with your grandparents.
No, I'm at the group home.
No, I mean, well, you said after your mom dies, some family members stepped in.
Oh, yes, my aunt and uncle did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my aunt and uncle did. So, I moved to the East Coast, and everything's different. And I wanted to make that work. Ultimately, I lived with them for about a year. It didn't work out. But, it was like, hey, I'm out of the group home, and, let's give this a shot. And the thing that I remember really was like, hey, it's one kid to 2 parents. That's pretty cool. And I just remember the environment being much more intellectually rich. And, like I said, it didn't work out. So ultimately, I went to a boarding school called the Milton Hershey School, which is...
Hershey, Pennsylvania?
Hershey, Pennsylvania, yeah. Yep. So if you've ever had any Hershey's chocolate, you were funding the world's largest orphanage. Milton Hershey School and Milton Hershey and his wife Catherine couldn't have kids, and so they left literally all of their money to a small orphanage in like 1906 or 1909 or something.
Wow!
And that was like $60 million back in the day.
That's a lot of money.
So $15 billion today.
Yeah.
So this school has an endowment that's like Harvard or Stanford sized endowment, and they have 2,000 kids there now, and it's very, like, the physical plant is very beautiful. It's kind of like the Shire, but for orphans. So.
Are they PA kids? They're Pennsylvania kids?
Yes, it's a great question. So the mandate, the charter actually explicitly says this is really about Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh.
But so the way that it works, it's a very multicultural institution, and oftentimes there's a lot of kids from PA, and there's a lot of kids from the inner cities of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and DC.
Got it. Okay, it's a mix. Yeah. How did you get from Maryland to PA, though?
My aunt and uncle, they just said, hey, you're going to go to this school.
They looked around, and they identified it and said...
They knew that it wasn't working out.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're like, hey, this is going to happen. Okay, this is going to happen.
Did you know it wasn't working out?
It became clear. Yes.
Were you acting out again, or were you?
I just don't think it was working.
Okay, so it's not working. They were like, we have to find some other place for you to go. Your sister, by the way, did not come with you.
No, she did not. So another aunt and uncle of mine, they intervened for her, and they did not feel like they could actually take her into their house. Like myself, my sister also had behavioral issues, and so she ended up at a boarding school in the Berkshires, or like New York State, right by the Berkshires or something, right around there.
Yeah.
So we both ended up just on the East Coast in different schools.
Yeah. So how was the Hershey School for you? I mean, if it's more resources, sounds like.
Yeah. So MHS was okay. I didn't have a great time there, but it was not that sort of like almost Dickensian like poverty that the ACCH was in the 80s. The ACCH is actually not the same organization these days. It's it just I went back there recently. It feels very different. But when I was there, it was like
Rough.
we were one step away from being on the street.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I was one step away from being on the street. That is not an exaggeration. At Milton Hershey School, it's a much larger organization. So you have, let's say, when I was there, call it 1,000 kids. It's twice the size now.
Wow.
And so the kids are organized instead of a cottage, they call it a group home. They're organized in group homes. Excuse me, I misspoke. They're organized in student homes. Again, the same sort of ratio, 2 parents and maybe a kid of their own to 16 kids.
Yeah.
And so now it's high school, and I was bullied very severely at Milton Hershey School. And so I didn't really enjoy myself there. And, the education actually, for me, was not particularly exciting. So I tuned out for 4 years.
You did?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
The bullying, I mean, you're a sizable human being. You're pretty big.
Yes. I didn't start growing until I was almost out of high school.
Late bloomer?
Yeah.
So it was a size thing? Or just because?
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. So I was new, all those kids had been around each other. My house father was one of the most difficult house fathers at Milton Hershey School. And because of that, was able to manage the most difficult boys at Milton Hershey School. So I got really unlucky. Really,
so you were put
really
in this
unlucky.
house with
Yes.
all the other difficult kids.
Yeah, exactly. And by relative standards, I was not very difficult.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people have very different experiences at Milton Hershey School. I recently went back to, for the first time in 30 years, actually, I went back to a homecoming. And nobody denied my experience, right? But a lot of people said, hey, that wasn't my experience. And
That they'd had a good time.
That the school was meaningful for them, and that it had got them out of trouble. And certainly I have that perspective too. I mean, in the sense that like, hey, Milton Hershey School was better than being on the street, right? There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not trying to disrespect the school. Yeah. I just had a very, very unfortunate experience there. I got my ass kicked a lot.
I mean, I'd have to say that kind of, that's a long time, 4 years for that.
Yes,
like
it
that,
is. Yes,
that
it is.
will affect your viewpoint on life.
Yes, it
right?
will.
Like,
yes, it will.
I don't know. I already find it remarkable that you found a life of intellectualism, right? It's very, I think you probably know this, right? It's very difficult for someone to come out of that situation and end up the way that you did. This is high school now. Like,
Yeah.
this is important for you getting into colleges
Yeah.
and stuff. And you're tuned out. How are you getting the grades?
I was smart.
You were just taking the test and doing...
It was an easy school.
Wow.
Yeah, so I, aside from a home ec class in which I got a B, I would have been the valedictorian.
Really?
So yeah, I tied with a good friend of mine for second place. I don't know how to say it, I just didn't have to work at that school.
You didn't study, you'd go in, you'd take the test, you'd nail the test.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, once we got to like AP tests, and these are standardized tests across the country, I didn't do well in them.
Yeah.
Of the 5 I took, I only succeeded in 2, right? And that was primarily because those 2 teachers had expectations, right? And so you live up to those expectations. So for me, though, a life of intellectualism, I guess, as you would say, that goes back earlier. For me, I was tested for the gifted and talented program when I was in, I believe, 3rd or 4th grade. And it became an out, right? Like I passed the test, so I made it into these classes. The classes were more interesting. I wasn't bored. I think some of my behavioral problems, certainly not all of them, were related to boredom in school. So I was in these different classes, and because of that, and probably the time I was about 10 years old, I started to see that intelligence was a concept in the first place. Before that, I was completely oblivious.
Right.
And that concept had really far-reaching implications for not only the people around me and my interactions with them, but for my long-term future.
Yeah, so you sort of understand that intelligence is a thing and it applies to you, that you have it.
Yes, and that I have it. That's right.
And this is an opportunity for you.
Exactly, yeah. So, from the perspective of a kid making it out of one of these situations, I don't think it was central that it was intelligence. I mean, intelligence has a lot of benefits, and not the least of which is you can understand what the hell's going on around you, right?
Yeah.
But if I had been, say, great at baseball, or if I had been like model beautiful, I think anything that sort of gets you the attention of adults, because keep in mind, neglect is the thing, right? That is the main problem we're contending with, that any of those sort of highly valued qualities by society would get you the attention you need so that you understand what might be going on in your life and how you might angle yourself towards a successful future.
Like somebody singles you out.
Yeah, exactly.
And says, hey, by the way,
yeah,
you're smart, or you're good at baseball, or you're supermodel,
exactly.
pretty,
you
as you
could
said.
be somebody. That's right.
And so that happened to you.
Did it happen to me? I'm sure this will get clipped, but this is emotional stuff for me. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah. So at school, the teachers definitely knew I was a smart kid, right? And it would come up. And so even I don't remember a particular intervention, but I just remember always being the smart kid. And I began to focus on that. And then I had some conversation with another kid at the group home, this guy named Miguel, where we were talking about, like, how the hell are we going to get out of here? He was maybe 3 years older than me, more mature, but I was precocious. So, we'd have conversations about it. And he's like, well, you could go to college and there's a way to get money. I'm not quite sure how to do it. And, we were brainstorming together, and I'm like, well, Miguel, you can maybe, work your way up a corporate ladder and so on and so forth. And ultimately that's what we did.
So this was in Albuquerque still?
Yeah, there's Albuquerque. I was in 4th grade. I know it sounds preposterous. I had really planned my life out to at least college when I was 10. That's how I'm gonna do this, right? So when fast forward to Milton Hershey School, which again wasn't for me an intellectually enriched environment, I was just waiting it out.
But you were waiting it out, knowing that you're getting good enough grades so that you would have a chance to do something else.
That's
okay.
Right. So through all of it, I was always sure to get good grades. It just happened that it was not difficult.
For you,
yes.
Yeah. So you could not study, but get the grades like, good, there's another A, eventually I'm going to find my way to college, that's my way out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Miguel was also, when you're like, how do we get out of here? You mean like, how do we get out of this group home?
Yeah, in the long term. Sense, how do we survive this?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so then you sort of finish your 4 years of high school, and did you start applying roundly for schools? How did you?
Yes, I guess, because I was reading all the like Scientific American magazines and like Discover magazines when I lived with my aunt and uncle in 8th grade, I had gotten it into my head that MIT was the place where I wanted to be.
Yeah, well, it's not a bad choice.
Yeah, so because like in these stories, they tell narratives in these more popular magazines, right?
Yeah.
And like, hey, this person did this crazy thing, and they worked this computer science or physics magic, and the next thing you know, there's Jedi powers, So I was totally enthralled by this, and I really became focused on science. At the Albuquerque Christian Children's Home, well, Christian was no nonsense. So for me, if I had stayed in that environment, I know it sounds nuts. To my ears today, I could have ended up as a preacher. Totally.
Oh, really?
100%.
You're getting a heavy dose of that, too.
Oh, yes. 3 times a week, right?
Oh, okay.
So one of the benefits of moving away from the ACCH was it gave me a little space from the religion, day in and day out religion.
You want to close them?
Yeah.
Let's close them. Yeah, sure.
No, we're right by a road, and see, where were we?
You're thinking about applying to schools.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I think about applying to schools, and I may have aced the test at MHS, but I was not prepared for college, and my test showed it. Like I said, I only got 2 of those 5 AP tests that I took. My SAT scores were okay. They were good, but they weren't stellar. They were not the kind of scores that you need to get into a world-class technical institution, right? And it's really funny. Like they asked, you have to write this essay
for college, right?
For college,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And I look back and I just laugh. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have any guidance, right? So like I get this thing and I'm in AP bio class and I pull out my handy dandy ballpoint pen and I just start going for it right there in the application about like swimming, which I couldn't stand. I hated my swimming extracurricular activities.
But you were writing, I'm a swimmer.
Yeah, exactly.
And this makes me suitable for college.
Yeah, something like this. Like just horrific, full on with crossed out text and like a caret to say, well, this is really what I really...
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. So, the letter came. It was very thin. And they said, thank you, but no, thank you.
It's MIT, you mean?
Yeah, exactly, MIT. So I had applied broadly, though, and I got accepted into a number of good schools, including Carnegie Mellon. That's ultimately where I went.
Yeah, great school. Yeah. Great school for engineering, actually.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So that seems like a
it was a good outcome.
Great fit for you.
Yeah, it was a good outcome, totally. It was a fabulous outcome.
But this essay thing, I mean, like if you'd written it today, of course, they always there. It's like, tell me about things that you've overcome in your life, and you had to overcome all these things in your life, and they were not in the essay.
It was completely lost on me. I mean, not even in my wildest dreams did I think that an essay that mentioned the challenges that I had as a kid might reflect well on me in an environment where there was a balance between challenge and support.
Yeah.
Right. Like no clue. Yeah. Completely missing in my way of thinking.
Yeah, it's not even appropriate to share that with them.
Yeah, exactly. Almost. And exactly. You could even go further and you could say that, hey, maybe there's some shame about these experiences and so I don't want to talk about them. Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's so well. Anyway, you got into Carnegie Mellon, which is a good school.
Exactly.
So, what were you planning on studying there? Did you know going in?
I wanted to study physics. Yes. So I'd always been captivated by sort of understanding the world, getting to the heart of the matter. Sort of, excuse the pun.
Yeah.
And it, I think, really resonated with my religious sensibilities from my earlier years of just understanding the world and God and blah, blah, blah. So I got to Carnegie Mellon and I started in physics, and all it took was one experimental physics class to convince me that wasn't my path. And simultaneously,
what happened? What was it?
Just because it's like, take a piece of yarn and tape it to a marble with duct tape, and now propagate errors for 20 pages. No, if that's what physics was, I wanted no part of that.
Yeah, okay.
Right? In hindsight, I actually regret not sticking through because, well, it's all hindsight. Knowing what I know now, what I do now, physics-y math and physics concepts are pretty useful in computational neuroscience. Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. But I didn't know that then. So what I ended up doing, and I ended up transferring to computer science, which is also really useful for neuroscience. Yeah. And so I took the programming classes and the engineering classes and a lot of actually really deep math classes. Now that's the kind of math that you don't use in neuroscience. It's all complexity theory and abstract algebra and group theory and things like this. So it was great education, but I don't really use that. What I use from computer science is
coding.
Sort of, just the ability to code. Yeah. The computer has always been my friend. In fact, you could almost back out and say, well, how did you make it? Well, you could point to the early computer. I mean, so I had no opportunities, but I was in a public school, and by the early 80s, they were starting to bring the Apple IIes in.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, totally. So
did that captivate you?
Oh, yes. I mean, I remember the Oregon Trail.
The game.
Yeah, the game. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You died of dysentery.
Yeah.
Or I remember Logo. Do you remember you used to draw with the little...
Yes. Yeah.
So I found these things captivating. My teacher sent a note pinned to my shirt that said, please talk to David about the value of sharing. He refused to share his computer with his lab mate.
Well, yeah, you don't have it at home, so yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's like the gaming. Gaming has brought a lot of people into computers. That seems to be true for you.
Yes. No. For me, if you go back to the whole beginning of it, it's all about video games.
Like arcade games.
Like arcade games. I'm 48 years old. I was 5 years old when Pac-Man came out, right? I was captivated by these games, and I didn't have any money, but I would pretend I could play the games, and then I'd go scrounge up a quarter if I could, and I'd go play the games. And since I had no money, I worked at it, and I wanted to be good and make the experience last longer.
Make the quarter last longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's some escapism there. There is a way of understanding a very confined world that you have a control over. There's a sense of agency. I had no agency in life. So I don't think it's particularly uncommon for little kids to be really interested in video games. I was one of those little kids.
So was I, yeah.
And I ran with it. My Xbox is over there. I still play.
Yeah.
Right. But when I was a kid, it was really the thing that I was focused on. And so if you really wanted to go all the way back, that's really the beginning of it.
So when you're at MIT and you're learning to code, are you...
CMU, yeah.
I'm sorry, when you're at CMU and you're learning to code, are you considering that you might want to build games?
What did I think? At the time, no. It was a little heavier than that. I was focusing on understanding the world. I wanted to be a deep thinker. Capital D, capital T. I was a little intense at the time, right? I was taking things very seriously. I went from, in high school, a pathological disinterest in all things academic to, when I got to Carnegie Mellon, a pathological interest in all things academic. And because, what had happened there was like, I already told you, I spent the last 10 years planning this moment. This was like, if I don't pull myself up by my bootstraps right now, this will never happen. I will not make it in life.
Yep.
So it became very, very serious. And I was taking all the hardest classes I could take. And I had a chip on my shoulder about not getting accepted into MIT. And I really wanted to prove myself. So all of a sudden, I'm super stressed out because I'm taking all these classes with kids who are way more prepared than I am, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of the mentality I had. It was really stressful because when everyone is so much better prepared than you, you can't tell the difference between intelligence and better preparation when it's so far. Right? You're like, oh, these kids around me are geniuses. I have no idea.
And they were just better prepared. Is what you're saying.
I mean, they could have been smarter than me, but I know that they were better prepared.
Yes, if you had been able to prepare the way they had, you would have looked like that.
I assume so in hindsight.
Yeah. No, I would assume so too. Right. Yeah. Okay. So then, after 4 years of CMU, upon graduation, did you? I mean, I know that you.
So I didn't graduate. Yeah, So I started working at a startup company in my junior year. I needed money.
In Pittsburgh?
In Pittsburgh, yeah, exactly. So I was going to school part-time eventually and working full-time. It was for one of the very first original social networking ideas. Some idea you pay money and it goes through a network and maybe somebody will answer your question. You submit a question and you pay money and maybe it'll go through and somebody will answer it and everyone on the chain gets a kickback. Interesting idea. No chance in hell that's going to work. Yeah. We know that now, again, in hindsight, right? Yeah. So anyways, I helped build that whole system out and we built a team and I became sort of a tech manager there. So when that went belly up, I quit school.
How long did it take to go belly up?
I guess I'm conflating two things. I got sick of being there because of just interpersonal interactions, so I quit. It went belly up another year or two later.
I see.
Yeah. So I'm left with now, I'm at the end of my fourth year in college. Despite being stressed out in my initial year, I ended up doing pretty well. And I became friendly with a lot of people who also succeeded at Carnegie Mellon. And so I ended up taking a job in a startup company that was moving from Pittsburgh to Boston. That was a play of AI meets gaming. So the play there was if you could build a better language for expressing the behaviors of AI characters, then maybe the AI in games wouldn't suck so badly. And another good idea, I don't think that's ultimately worked out. So I ended up in Boston.
The company was started in Pittsburgh, but what, the venture capitalists want to move it to Boston?
They were started by a couple of professors in the CS department at Carnegie Mellon. And it's my understanding, I mean, I was just a peon programmer at the time. It was my understanding that they wanted to move to Boston to capitalize on the tech talent there.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So you went with them. You didn't finish your degree, and you went with them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I go to Boston, and my life completely falls apart. So this whole time, I'm in college, right? They actually do a pretty good job. You go to college, you have orientation, you make friends, you're in classes. All that's gone. I have no friends. I have literally never lived alone. In fact, I've only lived with like cozy groups of
16 kids.
Yeah, exactly, right? So all of a sudden I'm in a new city. I did not find Boston particularly welcoming.
Yeah.
And my life fell apart.
You're living alone, working.
Yes.
You're going into an office at least?
Yes, going into an office.
So you'll interact with some people there, but...
That's right. I had no girlfriend. I had no friends.
No social life at all.
No social life whatsoever. Yeah. So I'm in this place, and like all this, within 6 months, I go from being relatively at Carnegie Mellon on top of the world to like, I start having anxiety attacks. Like legit, no BS, like, hide from the world.
Paralyzing.
Paralyzing anxiety attacks. It is, when you have one of these types of attacks, it has the prominence of pain, right? Like it is the only thing that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
And you're just waiting for it to pass. So I start going through this for like 6 months, and I was not in a good place.
No, I would think. But you're still employed there?
Yeah, I'm still employed there.
You're just sort of muscling through this.
Just muscling through
God.
it. Yeah, exactly. I might have a panic attack at the
office.
At the office, and then I'm freaking out, and so it's funny. The first panic attack I had was in the office, and I remember what happened. I'd never had one of these, not like that. I'd never had one like that, and so I'm like, what's going on here? I don't feel quite right. And why can't I breathe? Yeah, why can't I program? Like, why can't I focus? And all of a sudden, I'm just like bug-eyed, hands on the table, staring around. Does anyone see what's going on with me? Am I dying? So it passes. Bridging 6 months of absolute misery, I finally reach out to an aunt and uncle of mine who live in New York.
Different aunt and uncle.
Different aunt and uncle. Yeah. They are both psychotherapists.
Ah.
And they'd been involved in my life. The particular narrative that you and I are having hasn't involved them, but they were around in a few very important points in my life.
Okay.
So I felt comfortable enough reaching out to them, saying, "Hey, look, man, I don't know what's going on here, but
this is what I'm feeling.
I am not right." Yeah. So I ultimately, because of that, I got into psychotherapy.
So they were able to identify it? They're like, this sounds like a panic attack?
Yeah, they knew exactly.
They knew exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Did they recommend somebody?
They made a recommendation based on their own
networks.
Yeah, exactly. And I moved to New York City to just be closer to them. I mean, I was.
Oh, they were in New York.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because the way to get rid of anxiety is to
not
move to New York.
Yeah. No, I was by them. It felt safer and closer than Boston. I did not have a good time in Boston. So, it took me a couple of years to sort of get my head on straight, maybe a year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah.
And then I start thinking about, well, what's next? This crisis has passed. And so I joined a startup again, a couple of startups. Finally, the dot-com bubble bursts in 2000 or 2001.
Yeah, right there.
I think it's 2001. And so I never finished my classes, right? So I'm like, I need to finish my classes because I want to go to grad school. So I think I had 4 classes left. I go to Brooklyn College. I go to Columbia. I just find ways to get these 4 classes taken care of, and ultimately I graduate in CS from Carnegie Mellon.
Wow.
Yes.
When you're having your panic attack, was it triggered? I mean, it's not easy to tell, I know, but like the thoughts of your future. That's what it was triggering it.
I would say so. I mean. What I would say is that I didn't know what to do with myself because I had this 10-year goal of surviving my childhood.
Yeah.
And it's true, I quit school, which was a poor decision in hindsight, especially. It was a poor decision even then, I'll be honest with you. But I felt like I had succeeded at Carnegie Mellon, right? I was in the hardest classes, doing decent grades, not brilliant, but decent grades. I was working at a startup. So I felt like I had been true to my own desires of what I wanted to get out of that experience. So it wasn't so much that I quit that was causing me angst. It was thinking about the future, as you said. What next?
Right.
I had nothing. I don't have any family support. Like, it's really hard for people to understand. Like, I don't call someone up on weekends, hey, Mom, how you doing? And, get that sort of rush of warm love, make me ready for the next week. Like, I don't have that, right? That's not something that's part of my life. And so because of that, I think, we could go into some deep, dark places, but that's ultimately...
Well, I'm sure that led to other feelings that were coming up, right? Okay, so all right, so you're like, all right, I got to get this degree finished so I can go to grad school. Yeah. You do that. Did you know where you wanted to go or what you wanted to study?
No and no. So I went to I went to Columbia University for a master's degree, and so of course I have no money, right? So it turns out a lot of academic organizations, Columbia, etc., they don't pay particularly well for administrative jobs, but they'll let you have a very, very cool fringe benefit, which is a free master's degree.
Yeah.
So I got a job there as the Unix systems administrator of the electrical engineering department over, let's say, 2001 through 2003. And in the process, I'm getting a free master's degree in electrical engineering.
Do you have to apply to get into the program?
Do you have to apply? I guess so. Yeah, yes,
you must, right? They don't just give you, right?
Yeah, no, I must have.
So you apply to get in the program, you get the job.
Yes.
The job is not going to pay you much, like, walking around money, but the degree is paid for.
You can make it work.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can make it work.
That's a good plan.
Yeah. So during that time, I was thinking broadly about what I wanted to do. Now, of course, I'm in psychotherapy, right? So I do at least have an hour with somebody every week to think about what's my life all about?
Yeah.
How does my past inform my present? I mean, what do I want to do in the future? So I started... Electrical engineering is a little bit of a catch-all discipline. So the people at Columbia were pretty open-minded, and they were cool with me taking a couple of exploratory classes in neuroscience. Yeah.
So now this is beginning to coalesce a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So by the time I'm ready, I want to apply to get a PhD. And so I apply around for neuroscience because I think it's pretty cool. And I wanted to do something, it sounds hokey, but I wanted to do something that were like my technical gifts could be applied to something that may have something to do with the human condition. Yeah, right. Exactly. So that's really why I got into it. No nonsense there. And so I started, I applied broadly and was rejected everywhere, except for Boston University.
You weren't going back there.
I wasn't going back to Boston. That's right. And so I'm at Columbia, right?
Yeah.
And so I have some visibility into what's going on because I'm in some of the classes, and I see the weekend where all the prospective students come and go, and I was not part of that. And somebody must have dropped out of the class at the last minute because I got a call from the department head and said, "Hey, how'd you feel about joining Columbia University's neuroscience program PhD right at the last minute?"
You had been turned down by them?
No. But I just know what was going on because I was there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's the program you got into?
That's the program I got into.
But you'd had this experience in industry, right? These startups. Were you now thinking about just being a professor in academic life, or you didn't know?
I don't understand your question.
So you had not finished. You'd left CMU and worked at startups, right? And that's out in the world, that's an industry job.
Yeah.
But now you're getting the PhD because you wanted to return to industry, or you thought you might be a professor, you might...
For me, it was never about job. It's about the questions that occupy your mind. And I find science exhilarating, right? To me, there's a stereotype. I know scientists know this isn't true, but there's a stereotype that science is very technical and it's very cross T's and dot I's, and there are parts of that. But I think of science as a deeply creative act, right? And so the more I was involved in research, the more I liked it, the more creative. It's basically just like any form of art. There is a structure around which you can be creative.
Yeah.
And so for me, science was the structures. I don't mean to be hokey. The science was like reality, right? But you can be creative about how you approach the problems. And so as soon as I got a whiff of it, I knew I wanted to be a researcher, right? So it was never like I want to be a professor or I want to be in industry. That wasn't my concern.
I want to keep doing this. I want to keep asking questions. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's it. I mean, I think the creativity thing, your best scientists are creative.
I mean, I agree, but I think there's a lot of different ways to be successful, but I think creativity is a big part
A key,
of it.
yeah. Okay, so then you're in this program at Columbia, this PhD program, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, about so. I started before. So there's this very now famous Columbia Neurotheory Center, right? Larry Abbott and Ken Miller, I believe, started it maybe with Stefano Fuzzi. I'm not sure if he was in on the ground floor.
Yep.
And so I started at Columbia before that was there. So I actually started in an experimental lab, and it didn't work out. So I went to Austria I had a Fulbright grant my third year, and I got kicked out of the lab I was in at Columbia, with just oil and water, me and this professor.
You didn't get along.
Yeah. And so I'm coming back now to my fourth year at Columbia. I tell you, there isn't a door I didn't come through the back. I swear, I really mean it. And I'm coming to my fourth year.
Yep.
Have nothing under my belt.
You mean you don't have a lab to come back to?
No, I don't have a lab to come back to.
Oh.
So the department chair at the time, I think he felt that I was hard done by the previous professor.
Uh-huh.
And so he's like, hey, Larry, well, you got this guy. He's got a technical background. He's done a lot of programming. He knows math, blah, blah, blah. So Larry's like, no, I'm not going to take this guy. He just got kicked out of a lab. And so I think there was a little back and forth. And ultimately, he agreed to take me on rotation my fourth year. For those of you who don't know, that's not great. You should be well ensconced in a laboratory and on your way by that time. So thank you for that, department head of Columbia, and Larry, actually. And so as soon as I interact with Larry, it's like, boom, this guy and me are on the same wavelength.
Oh, that's great.
It took maybe 6 months to find a project that we both thought was interesting, and the next thing you know, it's like almost telepathic levels of communication intellectually between the two of us. And so I had a PhD, into the details of it, but it was about training recurrent neural networks. And
this is the I'm not going to say famous, but the sort of Sussillo and Abbott paper came out in 2009, right? That was a big deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that paper was...
That happened in your PhD.
Yeah, exactly. That paper was maybe a year and a half in the making. I mean, really, once Larry and I sort of got on the same playing field, then it was just amazing. So yes, I could transition into that, but into the intellectual stuff. But
just tell me what research went into that paper, and then what it did for you.
Right.
Because in my reading from the outside, that sort of changed your trajectory a little bit. I don't know.
Yes, a lot, hugely so. So the long and short of it is, I was inspired by two scientists, Wolfgang Maas and Herbert Jaeger, liquid state machines and echo state networks. And before about 2012, looking past Schmidt-Huber, who did all this stuff in the late 90s, the general consensus was that you couldn't use backpropagation to train artificial neural networks, and certainly not recurrent neural networks. And there's like proofs that you can't do it, right? So nobody was trying to do it. And instead, the people were exploring ideas that maybe just completely random interconnections between neurons would be enough of a computational basis upon which to build computations that are meaningful for organisms out in the world.
Right.
And that was the liquid state or echo state idea. And so, in a nutshell. And so, at the time, Larry was working with Chaim Sampolinsky and Kanika Rajan on understanding random networks from a physics perspective. What kind of phase transitions they have? Are they chaotic? How many fixed points do they have? What kind of dynamics do they have?
Yep.
Right. And so what I think Larry and I identified together was that the training methodologies that were coming out of the echo state network world really might actually speak to some of the types of networks that they had been studying with like hardcore statistical physics. And so I was the person that joined those two, right? And what happened was I came up with a learning rule. It's basically glorified recursive least squares, but there's some details there that are pretty hairy. I came up with a learning rule. All of a sudden, you can train recurrent networks, right? Well, on tasks that people care about.
Yeah.
So,
was this like the forced learning?
This is the
right?
forced learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is called forced learning.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm going to sort of abridge why it's forced learning. It solves some technical problems that are very real in recurrent neural networks. And so, from the perspective of my career and the perspective of neuroscience, it's hard to underestimate what it means to be able to actually now train an artificial system to do something, right? And I was in on the ground floor of that. Ultimately, the forced learning rule, it's used in other communities, like in physics
Mm-hmm.
or in soft robotics or things like this, where you can't do backpropagation, which is, of course, now the modern way of doing things in the deep learning era.
Mm-hmm.
But because it was the first learning rule that you could really feasibly train a network,
Yeah.
I was a kid in the candy store. Because now I'm thinking, well, why do we join neuroscience? I want to understand how brains work. What does that mean to understand how brains work? There's the biology of it. There's the computation of it. There's all kinds of things you could focus on. But, one thing is like, well, how do all these neurons connect to give something that you'd call computation, which would ultimately give rise to behavior? And now for the first time, we can do it, right, in these artificial networks.
Yeah.
And I knew right away that the real value of the forced learning rule wasn't the learning rule itself. It give you the opportunity to understand how these networks work. Because just to have it out there, the basic assumption is that artificial networks are useful to understand because it's a connectionism play. That is to say, any given unit in an artificial network is analogous to a biological neuron insofar as they themselves can't do very much, with all respect to people who study single neuron physiology,
Yeah.
right? So, but if you connect them together, then now you may be able to have a dynamical system of much more sophistication and greater computational complexity. And so I saw that opportunity and immediately went for it. And so what I did, now I'm a postdoc at Columbia.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. That's, yeah. I was
Yeah,
going to say, because I know you transitioned to postdoc there, and then you did a senior postdoc out at Stanford, right? Yeah.
Krishna, yeah.
Okay, keep going.
So with Omri Barak, who is now at the Technion in Israel, we wanted to know how these things were working, right? And so I had been taking a nonlinear dynamical systems class, and what they do is, well, like there's fixed points where the system doesn't move around, and you can linearize around these fixed points, and the linear systems is something we can potentially understand. So all I did was make a culture play there, which was take literally textbook nonlinear dynamical systems material and introduce it to an entirely different field. And so with Omri's help, who really did the technical work of figuring out how to do the optimizations, we together cooked up a bunch of examples, and together wrote a paper that showed that these networks that we're training, like really basic, like think monkey physiology tasks, right? Have a network do a go no go task. If 2 bumps come in, it does this kind of bump, or this really basic kind of network, right?
Yeah.
Just think animal experimentation in terms of what they get these animals to do cognitively. So we can now train these artificial systems to do artificial versions of it. And then Omri and I started applying what we call now opening the black box, reverse engineering, to understand how they were working. And at least in simple cases, that textbook math and optimizations from the nonlinear systems theory worked perfectly. We knew exactly what was going on for literally the first time ever. I don't think anyone had ever taken a neural network of any sophistication, trained it with a rule that they didn't understand, and then reverse engineered it. There had been a long history of building networks by sort of hand, by construction, to do a thing you wanted them to do, but then it's cooked in. You know what's going on because you put it in there. Great. So it's an existence proof of construction of how a thing might work. And so because of that, we really we just thought the world is going to be open to us in terms of understanding potentially how brains work.
Well, yeah, I like how you keep saying that all you did was just this. I just added this to this, and then we got, as if it was easy. I mean, I know, but
it was. It really was. It really was. In that case, it really was.
True, but still, when a paper comes out and no one's seen it before, you've made quite a leap, right?
True.
So I was going to ask this about how you ended up going from the academic world to Google, but I think you've already answered that question. Is it really doesn't matter. You just want to answer interesting questions. As long as you have interesting questions in front of you, you're happy.
Yeah, there's a little bit, exactly, but there's a little bit more to it. So there is the, how to live a life side of it. So I had a very successful postdoc with Krishna Shenoy.
Yeah.
And
he just passed, no?
He just passed away,
Yeah.
sadly. So, we had this paper with Valeria Monte and Bill Newsom and Krishna about understanding how potentially, again, with the same methodologies of using artificial networks as surrogates, understanding how primate brains may, for example, integrate information while ignoring other
stimuli.
Other stimuli. And so we had a real feasible understanding of that whether or not it's true is anyone's guess, but we had a real hypothesis on data that was really, as Bill Newsom used to say, the prefrontal cortex is the zoo, right? You have no idea what these single neurons are doing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we could piece that together, at least as a hypothesis. So because of that successful postdoc, I was very much considering becoming a professor. But then I kind of took a look, and everyone makes different choices in life. And, especially coming with my group home background, the idea that I would have to, at a top school, sort of work 60 hours in perpetuity until I retired, I don't know how to explain how allergic I am to that idea. I just didn't want to do it, and I think the fact that that's normalized in academia is pathological. Not everyone works that hard, but at certain places they do.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I started looking for other options, and so that's the how to live a life portion of it. And then the other was, well, you could spin that I'm trying to understand how brains work by studying how neural networks work, or you could just say, hey, you're starting to figure out how neural networks work. And right at that time, it's so Google Brain started, I think, 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I joined a few years later. I was in, not quite ground floor there, but I was in pretty early. And they were basically hiring everyone, right? Anyone who had any understanding of how to train neural networks, because at the beginning, it was completely, it was the Wild West. Nobody knew anything.
Yeah.
And because of the work of especially Jeff Hinton, but a lot of other contributors, people were starting to realize, wait a minute, these networks are really powerful. And so Google was all in on that. And so they took a risk on a neuroscientist, and namely me. And that's another example of a back door that I got in. So I did the interview, and I had it completely mispegged, right? So I'm giving this hardcore neurophysiology talk that would satisfy the likes of a Bill Newsom,
right,
to a bunch of CS nerds who don't know the first thing about a brain. They don't understand why I'm saying it or even what I'm saying. So I get a call from the recruiter, thanks but no thanks, right? And so now I've already called up all my academic affiliations and said, hey, look, I know I was going to interview at your school. I just can't see my way to do that now, so I don't want to waste your time, So I canceled all of my academic interviews, and now Google just told me to go away. And so my next option is a social media site. I don't remember what it was called. It was Hot or Not. No, I really was
oh, come on.
No, I'm totally serious. It was. I really had all of a sudden. I had.
I remember that site.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that in so long. It's so funny.
So whatever. I don't think that was it, but it was something like that, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, my options have dwindled.
Yeah.
And I have 3 months of sleepless nights. And I get a call from the recruiter 3 months later. We think we might have made a mistake. Can you come in and interview? So I interview with Jeff Hinton and Jeff Dean, and I get hired. And so
what did they realize they wanted to do something that you had described in the phone, or?
I think probably a couple of senior people went to bat for me. So you have to understand the behavior of large organizations is highly multifaceted and multidimensional because you've got 50,000, 100,000 people there. So there is no monolithic Google, right? There's small groups of people making decisions, and it's entirely possible that because of lack of communication or culture mismatch, I just didn't come across as somebody they wanted to take a risk on.
Yeah.
I think it's much more mundane than...
Yeah. Okay. It wasn't like they suddenly realized the error of their ways or anything like that. Somebody probably just said, we should take another look at him. We actually know what he's doing or think it's a good idea.
So I'm sure somebody advocated for me, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have never gotten that call. So whoever that was, thank you very much.
Yeah. So 3 months after, you're sort of like, I don't know where I'm going to go next.
Yes,
Someone
exactly.
calls and says...
Yeah, exactly. So I joined there, and it was a great experience. I was at Google Brain for 6
years or something,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. And what was cool about that position is that, it was at the very early days of deep learning. So I was there 2014 through 2020. And it was one of those like anything goes type of experiences. And what was cool about Google Brain in particular is their leadership, I think, really understood that neural networks were going to change the world. In particular, they were going to change their world first and quickly. So what they did is they embedded all of the applied teams to come work with the more academic researchers, so that any advances on the fundamentals or foundations of training neural networks or any of that could be immediately applied to some of their core businesses. And so, nowadays, it's all public. Anything at Google that's too big. Many of the main core functionalities that Google provides when you go to their pages are all driven by neural networks.
Yep.
And that was a direct result of the way that they oriented their team, which was really cool.
Yeah. So then you, as you said, 6 years, then now you're at Meta.
Yes, that's right. Now I'm at Meta Reality Labs. I work for the control group. So this is think Oculus, think video games, think virtual reality. So I work on a team that focuses on electromyography at the wrist. This is a so-called control group that was acquired out of New York City. I think this is all public information. And so the idea is to really take consumer grade, basically technology and sensors and put them on the wrist so that you can read out the muscles there, of which we have many, your hands and your arms and your wrist, and apply machine learning to it to decode those electrical signals, for example, for gameplay. Like you can imagine just point and now the system knows what you're doing and you don't have to hold a joystick. Kind of thing.
That'd be amazing. I want to ask a few things and then we're done. I still sometimes feel that, especially in academic corners, that there's a sort of looking down upon of industry.
Yeah.
Do you get that sense at all?
Yes, I do. I have a lot to say here. Academia is a place where you can think about anything as long as you can get somebody to fund it. And that's definitely a broader basket, a larger basket than the kinds of things that are thought about in corporate research, right? So I'm limiting myself in conversation to science and technology research, right, as opposed to all of academia. But what corporate research really excels at, and I think most academics are completely blind to it, is just the scope of what you can do in a corporate environment. In particular, we have money. We can hire, and we can hire lots of different roles, right? So you can hire engineers, research engineers, other scientists, managers, people who actually want to manage, right? There's this confound in academia where the professor also is a manager. And let me tell you, that isn't always great. I think we all know this. So the other thing that happens in corporate research is if you want to be a type of scientist that doesn't become a manager, that's A-okay. Hey, don't make that transition. You keep doing you, be the best you can be, and you will have promotion. You will continue to progress in your career, continue to make money, etc. And that doesn't really happen. And so, that doesn't really happen in academia.
Right.
So unless you want to become a PI with all that entails, you're just not going to survive in academia, right? Yeah,
that's a good point. Like you can just be you can do all the hard science that you want in industry. You don't have to worry about elevating to take over the lab. You can just be a great scientist.
That's right, yes. Yeah, so and in corporate research, the scope is more narrow, right? There are explicit goals to make money based off of translated research. Yeah. And so that comes with the territory. The other thing that I would say is that corporate research tends to be much, much more collaborative than academic research. And I don't want to cast too broad of stereotypes here, but in my experience, it's very true. And I think that's because academia has a training mission, which is totally fine. In fact, it's better than fine. It's appropriate. People need to learn how to do a PhD, and part of doing a PhD is walking in the woods for a few years and just meandering and figuring out, the fastest, instead of circles, the fastest way to get to A to B is to just walk straight if you can, right? And so that's a really important function, but I do think that there is a downstream cultural effect where after that experience, there's this like the myth of the genius scientist kind of thing where now I got to go do everything myself. I've got to reinvent every wheel. I've got to write every piece of code, solder every single circuit together. And it is pathological to do this. And it's especially true in neuroscience, I think, because we're all coming from different fields.
Yeah.
And so to the degree that, sort of summarizing, that academics, scientists do have sort of looked down at corporate research, I think it's misguided. It's unfounded.
Yeah. Okay. Two things left, I think.
Sure.
One is, I saw this on Twitter.
Yeah.
This was your Twitter account, or X, whatever.
Yeah.
And this was a while ago. You had come out and said, this is when the Trump administration was separating children from their families at the border. And you came out and said, we have to stop this. And here's all the reasons why. And it was based on your own background.
Yeah.
I sort of wondered why you had done that.
I have never been particularly politically active.
That was my sense looking at your feed. Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it. I don't think I've ever come across something that our country did that I found so morally repugnant.
Yeah.
And within a day of seeing that, I was like, I was at marches. Like, this is wrong. I'm marching. And so as I'm going out to these events and this is happening on the news and it's happening in real life, I start realizing, like, actually, my experience is not that. I am not detained at a border, but I have something to say about what happens when kids are separated from their parents over long periods of time, especially young kids. I mean, they were doing this to young kids, right? And so because of that, I just pulled out a pen and started writing. And people reacted to that.
They definitely did, yeah.
So that was what would happen there. It was a gut reaction. I just couldn't believe I've never been in a position where I was like, I have to, if not me, then who? I have to say something.
Yeah, because I when I read it, I thought, there's lots of reasons why people were, on Twitter saying lots of reasons why they shouldn't be done. I'd never seen that reason before, and I thought it was really astute. Yeah. So there's a final thing I want to ask about, and this goes back to the thing you did growing up in science. Mm-hmm. So I watched some of that, and you had mentioned, you said a couple things. You said, one, as you started, you said, I may get a little bit emotional as I talk about this, and usually it's the gratitude that gets me. That's what makes the emotions come up. And then you told a story about a boy named Shiloh.
Yes. Who
you had known in the group home, I think, in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And this story is almost literary in its circularity. You were back in New Mexico, and you happened to see him on the street.
Yeah.
And at that point, your lives had completely diverged.
Yeah.
You had, although you had struggled, you had gotten degrees and you were well on your way, and he was begging for quarters.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, the reason, and I want to ask because I don't actually know, but I think the reason that you get emotional over the gratitude is because your life was hard, but it could have been that.
It could have been that.
If people didn't help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For me, boy, there's a lot to say here. I'm thankful for the things that I've been given, even though it hasn't been very much, especially early in my childhood. I was blessed with a genetic inheritance that has served me really well. And so, when you don't have much, I think you value what you get. So I think there's just some basic psychology there. I would say that, with Shiloh, I actually found him online.
You did?
And recently, a week ago, he's been in and out of prison for the last 20 years. I saw a picture. There's a website that has just the pictures of this guy over 20 years, the last 20 years from 2000. You can just, each one is, just a snapshot into this.
He's posting them.
I don't know where this is or how it got on there. Just a snapshot of this person. He's almost surely mentally ill on streets of a city somewhere, probably smoking meth.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing is, Miguel, I just saw him. He was at we had a little ACCH reunion. He's doing great. He's a preacher now.
He is.
So yeah, he made it. Yeah.
So he found the thing to pull him out.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mentioned my sister, she passed away recently. She committed suicide.
Oh,
So, yeah. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's I think a lot of people have really different experiences in the background that I have. And what I would say is, like, I would like to say that, my place where I'm at in the world is a function of all the people who helped me. And it surely is. It surely is. But I think the answer is much, much, much more complicated than that. And so, when I think about, like, Logo, the little computer game,
Yeah.
right? Drawing. Somebody put that out there to teach kids, And I think about, whoever maybe invented the Z80 processor that was in all the games. And, it was in the TI-85 calculator, TI-81 calculator that I had in high school.
Yeah.
And the Trash 80 computer, which was my first experience with computers. What you can do in this world can have really long-term impacts in ways that you would never know. And
almost as if whoever created Logo didn't know that one day David was going to see it and it was going to turn something on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or, much more close to home, my aunts and uncles who intervened in my life.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so I do think that, and the house parents even, I do think that as complicated as it is, if you put yourself out there and you make contributions, it's not easy to say who will do what or why or how it all ends up. But you're adding a net positive to the world, and that's kind of how I would leave that.
Yeah. One final thing. Do you want to? I know you're working on a memoir. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, sure. Yeah. So I recently wrote and sold a memoir.
Amazing. So you're not even working on it anymore. It's sold.
Yeah. So it turns out you are still working on it.
You're the editor.
It's
right.
editing.
Right.
It's a nights and weekends project, but I wrote down in much greater detail and with drama and scenes the conversation that you and I just had.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Any idea when it's coming out?
Actually, it should be out. It takes forever.
Yeah.
Right? So it'll be out in 2 years.
Okay.
So summer 2025, and that's just how those things go.
Yeah. Okay. That's it. Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
How was that? This one meant a lot to me personally, actually. It gave me a lot to think about. A huge thank you to David for an honest talk about some painful stuff. That kind of thing takes courage, so thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, this podcast will be archived at thetransmitter.org. If you liked it, you can subscribe to Synaptic wherever you find podcasts, whatever app or platform, Spotify, YouTube, Apple. You can also rate and review it, which helps other people find the show. If you're new to Synaptic, take a stroll through the archives. There's a great interview with Evdokia Anagnostou in there. Ashura Buckley, as I mentioned, the award-winning episode with Ashura Buckley, that's in the archives. Artem Patapoutian, he's in there. All free. Some of the information for our opening was taken from the ACCH website. Our theme song was written and performed by the great Chris Collinwood. And that's it. I'll talk to you on episode 9.
Yeah, why don't we, let's see. What do we want to do here? This house is old enough that some of our stuff is a little funky. What happens if